Everybody, after your well-deserved lunch break. We'll start this afternoon with a keynote and then follow up with different presentation of niche consortium members, after which we will have a Q&A. So please hold your questions or post them in the chat whilst the lecturers are giving their lecture. And then we'll have a second session after that by another batch of consortium members of NICHES. And we'll conclude our day with a panel discussion. Ida and Ulf, should I wait for a little bit more until people are dropping in, or should I start introducing Nikki?
I think if you could wait.
Maybe go ahead.
That's conflicting messages to me.
Or if you go.
Yeah. Just we start with the introduction.
Great. So the first speaker of today, of this afternoon, is Nikki Franciszkaki. I hope I pronounced your name right, from the University of Utrecht, who will be giving a keynote on governing nature-based solutions in major cities. Nikki is a professor of regional and metropolitan governance and planning at Utrecht University. Her research explores transformative urban governance and the implementation of nature-based solutions to address climate change challenges. Nikki has a rich international experience with ongoing projects in Canada, the United States of America, and Australia, where she has worked as the director of the Centre for Urban Transitions at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. We're very honored to have you, Nikki, and please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello. Is it okay if I share my screen with the slides? How would you like that we do it?
We have the slides shared for you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for making all the time to be in our online presence here in the NICES conference. The main message and focus of my presentation today will be about mainstreaming nature-based solutions, and mainstreaming not just as the outcome, but also as the governance process for seeing nature-based solutions being embedded across cities and regions in their urban agendas, across policy, planning, and practice. So if we move to the next slides, thank you. As we see from the amounting evidence that we see not only on published academic papers, but also on reports, on practice work, and also in the booming space of different SMEs and also small, medium enterprises and medium-sized enterprises around nature-based solutions, we see that really cities are the epicenters where experimentation and take-up of nature-based solutions happens. And this creates quite of a hope, especially on solutions taking steps about dealing with climate adaptation. If we move to my next slide, thanks. But a common misconception, though, around the narratives and how we all speak and report about mainstreaming is that we need to really move beyond looking mainstreaming as an outcome or a goal about the uptake, the normalization, the inputting in the agenda, but also look on the process of how this happens. And taking a governance and planning perspective is exactly casting an eye about these things, about how we are as good as the process that we set up, and inclusive, adaptive, and also innovative, meaning conducive to different forms of innovation processes for mainstreaming nature-based solutions. And in these icons I choose to put here is to see and to show really how they start to be incorporated in the narrative and in the practice across very different portfolios. It's not anymore for climate adaptation, it's also for health, for peace, for restoration, for meaningful work, especially in places where we see phase out of industries, but also with an intergenerational aspect. Next slide, please. The reason to speak about nature-based solutions, and we see that a lot, at least I experienced it firsthand during the IPBES plenary last year in December, is that policy practitioners specifically, they require more practical knowledge, and they ask research on how they can phase in investment that has been in different sectoral portfolios in nature harming activities towards nature-based solutions in their umbrella definition, agreeing on restoring nature back. There are many actions, and kind of almost as an overview of what we know that needs to be done and can be done differently for that. In the next slide. Yes, thank you. If we take a transitions perspective, looking not only what needs to be institutionalized, but also what needs to be phased out and experimented with, this is like almost a glimpse between different recommendations as a synthesis across the research we have been doing here in Utrecht University on looking about what are the good practices, what do we gather from experience across different geographies with making the mainstreaming of nature-based solutions inclusive, innovative, and adaptive. And given that today I only have 10 minutes, I'm focusing on 3 overarching messages. My first message in the next slide is that we need to step in on the background that we have on nature-based solutions. There is significant evidence about their efficacy to deal with urban challenges and how they can actually be devised to achieve sustainable development goals at a local scale. But this, of course, as it comes with a lot of benefits and opportunities, it also comes with challenges. And the main challenge lies on the fact that the multifunctionality of nature-based solutions, the multiple co-benefits that they are said to produce over time, confronts and creates opportunities on silo departments of local governments. And we see it more and more that this adaptability and agility on the narrative framing of NBS allows for different entry points of how they are planned and how they are governed in cities. This, at the same time, it creates opportunities, but it creates also blind spots. If it's anchored from an aspect of water reuse, like what you can see in the next slide, from, for example, here in the demonstrator of nature-based solutions in Ferla, in Italy, it creates externalities, but it creates also blind spots on who owns the space, what about risk, what are the different services that it can provide the community needs beyond an experimental and familiarization demonstrator in the school for kids to build with nature in their built environment. This also another example comes from Marseille in terms of how when it gets blocked from different departments in the city, how private spaces or public-private spaces can be offered as opportunities for showing alternative use of this space, from a street to a bioswale and pocket park, to the next slide with a connecting nature, movable living lab and green labs that we see with modular infrastructures for dealing with urban heat. All these examples and this key message brings more to the foreground the necessity for inter and transdisciplinary collaborations. And that's also kind of a very simple way of how we illustrate in the next slide in this figure. I find myself saying the same message over and over again. When we are to govern for and with the multifunctionality of nature-based solutions, it requires a critical and systemic understanding, not only of the opportunities that it can create, but also the challenges, and that is inherently linked with a necessity for inter and transdisciplinary collaborations. And we might say it again and again from a research point of view, but in practice, this is definitely not a standard practice. It's not a given that it happens always through collaboration. That brings me to my second message. When we look on the governance of nature-based solutions, what we saw from a multitude of projects, also pointing to the report from the Task Force of Network Nature on the co-governance, we see the necessity and we see also how new forms of governance are really playing a critical role in planning nature-based solutions in an inclusive way. That means in the future, maybe we need to think about different forms of this type of governance, not just place experimentation, but also policy experimentation and regulatory experimentation as well. To bring one more element in this is also to clarify a misconception. A lot of times when we talk about mainstreaming, and the literature mainstreaming offers quite a confusing remuneration of it, is that people think of mainstreaming as institutionalizing. However, you can still think of mainstreaming as a governance process where experimentation and innovations are really inherent to it. And this is also where we see the openness of thinking that it's not just mainstreaming a streamlined in vacuum process for embedding nature-based solutions, but rather it's still open to find ways of doing it inclusively across people, across different nature and habitat interests, but also looking on the different layers of planning. And this is also illustrated in the following slides. How to think differently and innovate differently across different sectoral perspectives, how to take also multi-species considerations on board, and on the next slide also how to take memory of place, intergenerational concerns and interests, as well as that they go beyond one agenda, but also through also a more socially attuned experimentation for mainstreaming. I will move to slide 15. I think the next one. And not this one, the one after. Thank you. So within this message that we see new forms of governance being pivotal for mainstreaming nature-based solutions, it also means that we understand, accept, but also seek to transform inherent trade-offs that they have been identified in the literature and practice of bringing nature-based solutions in cities. One of the most, let's say, commonly seen trade-off is when it comes for whom you build a nature-based solution. Is it for regulatory services like for cooling, for habitat creation, or for recreational uses? Because that comes also with landscape architecture decisions. It comes with safety and risk regulation considerations. And frequently it also invites for different designs and different spaces that you create for nature itself. By inviting and understanding the important role of new governance models, is also provides an entry point to understand and sometimes accept that these trade-offs will not be resolved, but rather we need to govern with and through nature-based solutions, not to amplify the trade-off in place. And as far as we have, and I'm always talking from a perspective from urban planning and urban governance, there is the trade-off between are you building more versus are you giving space for nature is going to always be there when we talk about the urban environment. So this is, for example, how can we understand and accept while at the same time find new ways to navigate and make sure this trade-off is not becoming I want to say it will not impoverish us, and especially the future generations, from a good living environment. Moving to the next slide, and I want to finish in 3 minutes. We have seen quite in the European context, because I don't know who from the audience is also outside from the European context. We have seen quite some successes in terms of the regulatory and institutional mainstreaming more on a transnational level. The European Nature Restoration Law posits partially NBS as one of the main components of restoring nature's environment. At the same time, now that we are in the phase of drafting implementation roadmaps across countries, and especially across river systems, we see that there is also a missing link of how the urban plays out a role and how urban is being viewed as in need or not of restoration. So we need again to look of an opportunity to experiment and create new regulatory experiments in order to bring nature restoration law in place and especially consider the urban environment. Now in Article 8, Principle 4, if I'm not mistaken, it's only about tree canopy cover and green spaces and the quality of green spaces. What is missing and what we also brought in the delegation to the Nature Restoration Law Task Force is about the aspect of the urban water and how we talk about green and blue systems together. My last message for today, that's the next slide, is to consider all the aspects, and here you might recognize quite some keywords and hot topics at the moment, but they're not just buzzwords or, something, a trend that's going to pass. The quest for planning cities more inclusively is definitely not new. How bringing nature-based solutions into the mix, it can also is how it is done. It's also attunes to the way, the quality, but also the pervasiveness that their co-benefits are going to serve the community. So it is about the governance of things that, in my view, is more telling about how we can achieve the inclusive living environment for all. And here is not to make things complicated, but to really embrace the multifunctionality and the potential of nature-based solutions. It is important for planning, policy and governance to consider representation, intersectionality, epistemological inclusivity, and also spatial inclusivity as well. My coming slides are just examples of different components, different representations of it. We can go very fast, but we can also move forward. For example, the epistemological inclusivity. In the transnational governance, we talk a lot about indigenous peoples and local communities, and this is very context specific. But we need to look beyond the usual suspects, beyond the planning and scientific knowledge, also towards the tacit, embedded memory, historically knowledge as well. It's also, if you move to the next slide, about recognizing which type of literacies are being and which are the literacies we need to build through these processes, like eco-literacy, even from the most simple perspectives. How do we take multi-species inclusivity into account? My next slide. How do you also consider beyond the current generation? And that's the next slide, with a more intergenerational perspective of how we build space. And also how we organize, how we co-produce with space, and that's the slide with a playground. Slide is the slide before. Yes. Oh, then one slide got lost. That's fine. How we also co-production is not just with people, but is with people, nature, and place, and that can create spatial boundaries, spatial appropriation, but also spatial accessibility to different services, including the ones of nature. And with this, I want to thank you and close my presentation.
Thanks so much, Nikki, for a wonderful presentation. People, please remember your questions. Put your questions in the Q&A because we'll handle them plenary after 2 more lectures. Thanks so much for this interesting presentation. And next we will continue to Giulia Benati, who is a postdoctoral researcher of the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and who will be talking about from perception to urban planning and integrating a lot of acronyms, people, PPG, PPGIS and DCE for justice in nature-based solutions. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your coordination, and thank you, Nikki, for your very interesting presentation. I can very much relate to it with my own presentation, since you highlighted the importance of not only the outcome of nature-based solution, but also the process of nature-based solution planning. And I would add to that also, like on the other way around, process of nature-based solution planning, as you as well were highlighting, also have an additional effect on the outcome. So in this study, we use participatory public GIS and the discrete choice experiment to represent local knowledge in a spatially explicit way in planning nature-based solutions. Ahead, please. Next slide. So everybody here know how climate pressure have a particularly intense effect on cities, and how this effect do not have an impact in the same way on all social groups, while vulnerable groups have a higher negative impact, typically as backed up by literature. And of course, nature-based solution can mitigate these impacts of climate change, but there is a gap existing how to, as Nikki as well was saying, systematically incorporate people's needs, perception, and knowledge into the planning system of nature-based solution. Next slide, please. So this is even more important for the process and for the above mentioned effect of the process on the outcome, because not only local knowledge will be represented and therefore nature-based solution would be more effective, but also they would be more accepted if the new intervention represents the perceptions of people, and our approach by integrating especially explicit techniques and econometric models such as the switch choice experiment try to link which ecosystem services of nature-based solutions people value more and where they want these services, and going beyond the distributional justice, we aim at adding some recognition justice in the process of acknowledging different identities and knowledges. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. So our case study is the metropolitan area of Barcelona, and a little bit more in depth into the methodology. The discrete choice experiment basically, in our case, not only determines which are the nature-based solutions preferred by citizens, but determines which are the ecosystem services, the attributes of nature-based solution that are preferred by citizens, not only by citizens, but also by residents, but also by which social demographic groups. and it integrates the results of this discrete choice experiment into a spatially explicit GIS. Next slide, please. So methodologically, we used an online survey that we distributed through a company in the Barcelona metropolitan area. Next slide, please. And so the objective was to determine which of these 6 ecosystem services that are attributes of nature-based solution are preferred. These 6 ecosystem services were determined after expert meetings and workshops. Next slide, please. So here are 3 examples of 12 choice sets that were presented to respondents in the survey. So the respondents could choose among 2 nature-based solutions, hypothetical, not even precise, just 2 hypothetical nature-based solutions that differed between 6 ecosystem services that varied in a binary way, so presence or absence, and a status quo option. So in the next 2 slides, you can see how we mix the presence, absence of these ecosystem services. Next slide as well shows an example of that. Next slide, please. So to the outputs and results of the respondents' choices of the discrete choice experiment, we applied a conditional logic model which estimates preferences across respondents, and a mixed logic model that does the same and also captures variation in individual preferences in order to see if it might be worth it to see if certain segment of population differed in such preferences. Next slide, please. And then we, of course, apply the PPGIS to really pinpoint and make these choices spatially explicit. Next slide, please. The PPGIS basically worked, it was one part of the survey, and people were asked to pinpoint where they lived and draw a polygon of the area of the metropolitan area that they knew better. Out of this, the total answers were then downloaded in a GIS file so that the spatially explicit responses could be linked to the discrete choice responses. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. So we aimed at 2,000 respondents, and we almost got to our goal. Next slide. So, and this slide shows that we stopped when we saw that the rapidity of answer were just decreasing too much. Next slide. So we, as it's always done in this statistical representation, we ensured that this study could be replicable in other cities by, and we showed it by, next slide, please, by showing that our survey sample was would differ not too much from the whole population segments of the metropolitan area of Barcelona, so that this study could serve as well as a pilot study and as a methodology that could be applicable in other cities. Next slide, please. Just some statistics, next slide. So let's see the results of the model estimation. So the answer we were trying to get is which people prefer having no nature-based solution, no intervention, or do they prefer new intervention? And if so, which are the ecosystem services they value more of these interventions? Next slide, please. So from the model, we can see that, first of all of our results are statistically significant, so the p-value is always minor than 0.001, 001, so this is great news for us. And also one first result is that the opt-out, so the status quo option, meaning no new nature-based solution, is strongly negative, meaning that people very much prefer to have new nature-based solution intervention rather than no intervention. Also, we could see that the most significant and the most valued ecosystem services of nature-based solutions are firstly heat mitigation, and this aligns with ecological consideration, since Barcelona is a Mediterranean city, and many studies have shown how heat islands are becoming more and more prominent in Mediterranean cities, big cities such as Barcelona, and this is firstly an interesting result. Secondly, we could see, and you see them colored in green, that ecosystem services related to water are particularly valued. So flood prevention and water storage are the second and third ecosystem services most valued in cities. So this is particularly important for urban planners to know that these are the services that people really value more to have in nature-based solutions. About the final column on the right, that is standard deviation, we can see that even though opt-out is highly unwanted, there is a lot of variation about segment of people or residents on socio-demographic strata for this option. So we wanted also to inquire which are the segment of population that actually are more prone to no intervention. Moreover, we can see that there is a high standard deviation for the ecosystem services service of habitat conservation. So also we wanted to inquire this point. Next slide. And yeah, this is just a graphical representation in which I ordered the ecosystem services in a crescent order so that it is clear to know for urban planners which are the most valued services and how in proportion they differ from the opt-out option. And you could also see the error, the standard error value, which is very little in our case compared to the magnitude of the results. So it's not, it's statistically relevant. Also, all these values have a very little p-value. Next slide, please. Next slide. So about this intersection between socio-demographic strata and preferences, we inquired this part, and so we want to know how are the preferences for attributes, meaning ecosystem services of nature-based solution, affected by or correlated with socio-demographic factors. Next slide, please. So firstly, the mid-range incomes show higher, we have a lot of socio-demographic parameters, but we can see that the mid-range incomes show a slightly higher inclination toward new intervention, but lower and higher income show no clear trend, while people who have higher education have a higher attitude towards change, meaning that the people that have a higher formal education tend to will to adopt new nature-based solution rather than having no nature-based solution. So it means that people with lower education have are more tend more towards the status quo option, and so they maybe that can be because they perceive lower benefits from new nature-based solution intervention. Next slide. And we are now testing other correlations, and we see that where interdependencies would be more correct to say. And we would say that now we are testing transport and outdoor leisure. So people who have more, that use more public transport or move by walking, have in general more more prone to new interventions rather than people that use private transports. Next slide, please. So we are still in the phase of exploring. This is a very interesting phase, new interdependencies, and we are in the phase of conducting the spatial analysis, which is being very motivating and interesting. So it's still, the results are still to be assessed. Next slide, please. We are also trying to link the spatial analysis with sentiment analysis of places as they are. Next slide, please. And also with the emotional connection to places. Next slide, please. Next slide. So from now, what emerges are very interesting results for us, and such as the key focus area, and for that can be, in our opinion, since this methodology is then replicable and applicable to other cities, and I'm ending my intervention here, that could really be a tool to represent local knowledge, to enhance acceptability of new nature-based solution, and to really change not only the benefits of new nature-based solution intervention, but also to change the governance structure of nature-based solution. This is in the most optimal scenario, and of course, but this is what we are used to do in research, to be very optimistic with the outcomes, with the utility of the outcomes of our research. So next slide, please. So the next steps of this research will be to really deepen the spatial analysis and to really come out with some useful information for policy and planning for an equitable and just nature-based solution planning. Thank you for your attention. Next slide for closing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julia, for this lovely talk. We're running a little bit late, so I would please like to remind the speakers to keep to their time. Next speaker will be someone from the consortium, the NICHES consortium, Johannes Langemeyer, who is a research professor and co-leader of the Socio-Ecological group at the University of Barcelona, and he will be talking about the decision tool for water managers, scenario maps of community vulnerabilities and feasibilities of nature-based solutions. And please remember to put your questions to all the speakers in the Q&A session of Teams. Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisette. Well, welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me in this afternoon session, and great to see so many familiar faces also in the audience. Next slide, please. We have discussed that we are facing technical lock-ins when it comes to water management in cities, and we are discussing today the capacities, next slide please, of nature-based solutions to address those technical lock-ins and at least to some extent mitigate those challenges that we are facing in urban environments due to the water. I'm a geographer by background, and you're going to see in the next slides that I'm having a spatial approach here to how to address those challenges and nature-based solutions implementing through an integrated planning approach, building on multi-criteria decision analysis. And I'm trying to bring the different pieces together, and most of the empirical work that you're going to see here in the following are not my own work, but primarily from other team members, primarily by Svetlana Kromova, and some parts of Julia's slides that you previously have seen are taken up here again. So the framework, the integrated framework that we are proposing here, consists of 5 different steps. And we propose to start with the needs from a spatial perspective, operationalized as the vulnerabilities from a SATS perspective and the risks. We move to the site-specific allocation of nature-based solution and the feasibility assessment from a SATS perspective. And from here only to the performance of nature-based solutions and the co-benefits assessment, while then proposing to add to this in the final step, the preference assessment in a spatially explicit way that we have just seen that Julia presented. Next, please. We have conducted some of this work across multiple of the case studies, but I'm going to focus today on the Barcelona case to illustrate this approach. Next. In the first step, the identification of urban needs. Next, please. We are focusing on a social, ecological, and technological approach to urban vulnerabilities. And what you see here is the mapping of diverse social vulnerabilities, and maybe this can already be an entry point to also some of one of the questions that Nikki has raised. How can we build in justice components more strongly into nature-based solutions planning? Well, at least from a social perspective, we believe that it's important to have a differentiated understanding of what is the vulnerable population in the city. And here we bring in some indicators such as the population over 85 years old or the very young people. Next. We're also looking at the ecological vulnerability. So we're looking at the ecological connectivity, at the functional biodiversity, and the presence of particularly vulnerable ecological systems. Obviously, and this connecting to the discussion we had this morning, this does not replace an in-depth analysis in place, but at least it's good to have some steerings at the spatial level, at the larger spatial level, to steer nature-based solutions implementation to those ecological vulnerable places. Next. We are also taking into account technological vulnerabilities. And here, for example, then the deficit of the existing sewer system, and where we have lowest capacities in here in order to take water or stormwater up. Next slide. We can see from this map that it's very important to consider all 3 of those dimensions, because each vulnerabilities have a different spatial distribution. So they must not necessarily overlap with each other, but they might have different strengths and different levels of importance in different parts of an area. Next. We then, in the last step, are crossing these SE and T vulnerabilities with the hazards and the exposure to those hazards, which lets us allows us to elaborate the risk, the final risk maps, what you're seeing here on the right-hand side for Barcelona City. Next. So that give me a second. That moves us to the second stage. That's the site-specific allocation of nature-based solutions. And here next. Here we're looking at 5 different types of potential nature-based solutions, including green roofs, bioswales, urban parks, rain gardens, and permeable pavement, with the idea that each of those come with very different characteristics, and the feasibility to implement them varies across the city. And we see that in the following slides. Next, please. So each of those nature-based solutions comes in with its specific social, ecological, and technological determinants and factors that you need to consider in order to implement them. So for rain gardens, for example, what we're looking at existing zoning policies, we're looking particularly at the ground slope, and we're looking at the soil permeability. We're also looking at technological components here, or the distance to building, or where there's underground structures such as electricity cables and so on in the ground. And this, as you see here, and someone asked for that before, that on these feasibility maps. Yes, it's true that this limits quite substantially the area where it's realistic to implement particular nature-based solutions. Next slide. We can also see that for green roofs. Here, it's more the social and technological rather than the ecological components that are critical to be taken into account. Next slide. For urban parks, we have a slightly higher potential in implementing them or across the city. And again, it's social, ecological, and technological aspects that play a crucial role here, particularly the existing zoning or current land uses. Next. For the permeable pavement, what we see here is that we are limited to the existing road net or path net in the city, where we might implement some we might implement those. Next slide. What we do here then, we're creating, we're looking at scenarios, and we built, and this is scenario 2, a new scenario for the city of Barcelona that would take the 25% of the highest feasibility score for the city. But what we see is, even if we only take the highest 25% of feasibility, we reach a much larger area of those that is currently planned for in the Plan Natura in Barcelona. That is an increase of 1 square meter of greenery per resident by 2030. So based on these feasibility scenarios, even though we saw that for single nature-based solutions, we have limited areas that we can occupy, we would still, if only going for the most feasible areas, we would still have a way more ambitious scenario than what the city is currently following. Next, please. So only when considered the vulnerability and the feasibility of nature-based solutions, we are looking at the nature-based solutions performance. And this is the work that Svetlana has presented this morning. So I'm only taking one slide, the next one, for you as a reminder of this. So what we have seen here is the potential for runoff retention. And when you look at the very bottom right side, then you see we are crossing this information not as net benefits. We are presenting these information not as not ecosystem service provision, but we're crossing this data with the vulnerability. So what is relevant here is to increase the capacity through nature-based solutions in those areas that are most vulnerable. Next slide. Similar is true for the co-benefit analysis. And here I'm again only taking one slide from Svetlana from this morning. Next, please. And we see again here when looking at the temperature for heat wave that our scenario 2 is increasing decreasing the vulnerability in crucial areas of the city, as you see on the bottom right hand side in the small graphic. Next. As a last step, we propose to cross this information that with the preference assessment, the spatial preference assessment that Julia has just shown. Next slide, please. So what we see here is the preferences for particular ecosystem services to be provided. And in the next stage, and we have, as Julia mentioned, not yet analyzed the data, but we will provide maps for spatially explicit preferences for different types of ecosystem services provided. And that will provide an additional super important layer for the implementation, the spatial planning of nature-based solutions in the city. Last slide, please. So the preliminary conclusions from this work, from this integrated work, is that we can see that the PPGIS and other approaches, similar approaches, can give us an additional information about the preferences of urban society. And this is important, and this links to what Dagmar has mentioned before, because it really makes explicit that we're taking into account the acceptability of our interventions in different parts of the city. And this might differ, and this might hamper the implementation of nature-based solutions. So we believe this is an important information to add here. What we also see is that nature-based solution feasibility is strongly differing with a specific location, with a nature-based solution type, and that is across all three social, ecological, and technological dimensions. What we argue for is that SET's vulnerability and risk assessment should provide the baseline for nature-based solutions performance analysis and the baseline for strategic planning. So we need to overcome the idea of producing net benefits of net ecosystem services and really look at the performance of nature-based solutions against existing vulnerabilities. And here, again, linking to the discussion of this morning, and I'm also one of the ones who have been skeptical with the nature-based solutions approach in the first place, I think here is really an opportunity where we can bring spatial justice considerations into the spatial planning approaches, and where nature-based solutions, with its focus on challenges rather as on benefit provision, provides a new entry point for strategic planning. And with this, I'm thanking you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Johannes, for this lovely presentation and also summary of the work by the University of Barcelona. Next, we have a little bit time left for the Q&A to all the previous speakers. And we already have two questions. One from David Camacho from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and that's for Nikki. But I'm not entirely sure whether Nikki is still here. But basically, his question. Oh, sorry. Yeah. His question comes down to how we effectively can integrate different justice principles into nature-based solution planning, considering the complexities that this may entail. And do you know an approach to this? So.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Well, we have tried a lot of different approaches to bring each one of these considerations on board. And in my slides, that's why I put like which consideration was put forwards and also taken on board for the design of the whole engagement and participatory process. What now we are trying to do is how to bridge multiple of them at the same time, right? How you organize such intertransdisciplinary processes to adhere to more of those considerations. My quick response to this is, first, it requires careful design. It's not that you can retrofit a process to adhere to different, scopes, because it needs to come with conscious decisions, with also principles of meaningful participation and also good governance principles. At the same time, what I find sometimes challenging and even unrealistic is to try to do everything like all at the same time. So we need to also take into account that governance processes, participatory planning processes, experimental processes, they're like over time. So we might allow ourselves as researchers who are very committed to transdisciplinarity, but also the planners that are colleagues to this, to do it over time. Like different people can represent different interests over the course of such a process. Just to also allow for this flexibility and the openness in this process. When we talk, of course, now for multi-species, who represents nature and nature as a stakeholder in these processes, I think we need to start thinking more creatively. And we need to think beyond the usual suspects that, a representative from the Ministry of Environment represents nature. Not necessarily. We need to see who in a specific context can voice and in which way the interest of the more than human, what are like a critical reflection on the design of the process, especially for cross-sectoral considerations and intergenerational considerations. So let's also think that these are long-standing processes, not everything at the same time, but put a scope of intersectionality from the beginning so it becomes a design principle, a governance principle, not an afterthought to retrofit the process.
Thanks for that. And I think it touches upon an important thing, because one of the IUCN criteria for nature-based solutions is that it evolves around adaptive management, and adaptive management comes with uncertainty. It comes with a specific monitoring scheme and modeling scheme, and it's self-learning over time. So this is something which is perhaps not always highlighted in nature-based solutions, but we're only at the baby steps, I think. We're still in the infancy of nature-based solutions. So I have great hopes for this. Another question by Ida, our own Ida, is to Julia. She finds your methods quite interesting, and she wants to know what aspects of that methodology are Barcelona specific. So basically it's about the upscaling potential of the methods that you guys applied.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Yeah, basically the aim and therefore the setting of the whole methodology was to really make it replicable and scalable. So there is nothing that is Barcelona specific by itself. And basically what would have to be adapted is just the company that distributes the survey. And so, yeah, we really set the methodology keeping in mind that we hoped could serve as a pilot case study to be implemented in other cities as well.
I think your answer satisfies Ida. If there is any more questions, please either raise your hand or put them in the Q&A. I will allow for another 1 minute or so. Oh, we have a question from Dagmar. Dagmar, you can unmute yourself if you want to.
Yes. So first of all, a big hello to both of you, Nikki and Johannes, of course to Julia too, right? It's so nice to see you so many years after the Urbis project on this quite similar issue ended, and we're just stating, what about the biodiversity, and felt we are only tiny steps further, but maybe some yes. So, Johannes, I was thinking when you showed these wonderful pictures, and also Nikki, when you showed your pictures from these real world cases. At the moment, I said it already in the morning session, we see that some of our wording language we used is at the moment kind of a bit not pushed back, but this is called it's too ideological. And then we have these, I call them always technic freaks. So they are very much on Germany is this liberal party, even if they are not technic freaks, but they say technology will solve it. Okay, this is the T in our systems, which we normally do not really look at so systematically. And my question to both of you is, I think we might ignore it, but we can also say proactively looking at this T in terms of material, in terms of kind of innovativeness, whatever, did you find in your examples a kind of an interesting, innovative technology T component, or is it just a classical, what at least also my examples and photographs show, so built in a far sense? This would be interesting for me.
I can offer something that was not in the pictures. That, well, with the Cardimet project, because we look on the whole Mediterranean, and especially in areas that the challenge is how to keep the greenery for heat during the dry months, and the dry months in Mediterranean are very long.
Yes.
So water reuse technologies, they become, like the key point. So how can they do water reuse without the risk, and also with the fact that how they can be also completely autonomous because of the power cuts, because of, overheating of the network. So there is where we see a lot of eco-technological solutions. And for example, I can put an example, I don't have a picture yet, is by using microalgae to filter water to use for irrigation of pocket parks in Nicosia in Cyprus, how they use rain gardens but filtered for urban agriculture in a lot of small houses and districts in Greece. And also how they did it even in private land in the Greek islands, with the example of Sifnos, the example of Tinos, that these are very dry areas and also very confined. You cannot go with your classic technical solution there. You really need to squeeze it, and that requires some innovation. So the microalgae together with the bioswale, to me, it's a very innovative combination. Both of these technologies existed. This is like nothing new, but putting them together is rather innovative. And also how to do this at the same time, not tapping into the electricity grid, making it really stand alone. For me, this is also kind of a new game in a way, because then you're really attuned to the local. You cannot expect that electricity will always run, water will always be there. Of course, people are not going to vandalize it. It's like exactly the opposite. Electricity is not going to be reliant. No, it's not going to be water. No, people will not like it. Then it's like, but we need it. So that's also like in a difficult context. And I think probably Johannes has the same or something to add.
I have a short sentence or two to add. So I think, and that was maybe one of my major lessons from this NICHES project, where we were digging deeper into the technological dimension than I had done before, and it really crashed a little bit with my own eco-romanticism to see that getting a little bit out of my own comfort zone and seeing the need to really engage with that technological system that is much stronger interfering here when looking at those water systems. And there's strong players in there that may not be so open for these ideas that we are having, and that is a constraint that I'm seeing here very clearly, that as an urban ecology community, we might be more open or already being very used to these more interdisciplinary perspectives. But when facing those engineering worlds, that many of them are not. And so that is breaking the silo on at the mental level. But not only, it's also that we have seen very, very strong constraints when it comes to data accessibility. And that is something that, I was thinking about this morning as well when you had the panel discussion. I think one thing that we would really need to foster is stronger data integration.
Yes.
Estonia is a great example here for
Absolutely.
the biodiversity data, where then all experts contribute to a larger database. And I think this is something that we see in the ecological dimension, but also in the technological dimension as a major barrier for advancing.
Yeah, super. Thank you. I fully agree with both of you. And I think maybe this is some of a take-home message where we should explore in the next years a little bit further, not becoming engineers, but at least more open and more knowledge.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I would say this works both ways. I think ecologists should also be a bit more open to thinking about engineering solutions. So I think it works both ways. And with regard to the Dutch situation, I always say nature-based solutions require space and pace, and that's something which is also in political cycles sometimes difficult. With that, I'd like to conclude the Q&A session. I think all the speakers are more than happy to answer additional questions through the chat function, I think. And I'd like to continue with our own Ida Meijenberg, who is sort of I would say, a force of her own and a driving engine behind NICHES. She keeps us all aligned, and it's always very important to have such a person in your consortium. She is a researcher in the field of water management at the Ecological Institute, and she'll be talking about best practice examples of NICHES case studies. Ida, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind what you're saying. Yeah, great. As Lisette said, my name is Ida Meijenberg, and I had the pleasure to work on the governance assessment of our 5 case studies. And because that was already mentioned this morning, best practice examples are usually the thing that policymakers, decision makers really like to pick up. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on these aspects in that presentation. Next slide, please. One quick overview of what we actually did was that we were using a mix of literature analysis and also key stakeholder interviews and try to identify effective governance models and policy instruments, but also the hurdles and obstacles to NBS adoption across all 3 different stages of NBS. That is the designing phase, who is actually being considered and asked when we're designing NBS solutions, the implementation phase, so which regulations are in play when we're actually building and implementing them, and then finally also the management phase or the maintenance phase, which is really important when we're talking about sustainability of NBS. So these are these 3 different shades of blue that you can see at the screen. And then what we did was that we tried to identify and analyze 5 different main elements of water governance, which is the different governance institutions in our case study cities, and then also looking at actor roles and power dynamics within these institutions, looking at policy frameworks that can be national, that can be local frameworks, but also governance instruments that might not be a policy, but instead, for example, a subsidy program or financial tools that come into play when we're talking about NBS adoption or management to tackle combined sewer overflow also, which is our core issue at the beginning of the project. And then, as I said, we looked at best practices and a little bit more, broader than that, in general, what were things that enabled or hindered NBS adoption in urban water management. So there could have been cultural enablers or financial barriers. There is a huge different variety of enablers and barriers that I will show you a little bit later on. Next slide, please. And with this huge package of data that we had done in a data protocol, let's say, we applied this data to the digital diagnostic water governance tool, which is actually a tool that comes from another project where some of our core members have been involved, namely STEER, which was a project solemnly about water governance all over the world. And this diagnostic water governance tool allows to feed in different coordination struggles or issues at play in different river basins all over the world. So we could try to identify then what are potential instruments or recommendations also to overcome the different hurdles and barriers that are at play. And this tool provides then graphic diagrams like the one you can see here on the screen. And basically the larger the bar, the higher the capacity of that governance system at play. For example, in the terms of governance structure. So we're talking about coordination, horizontal coordination, but also vertical coordination between the different institutions. But not only in laws and regulations, so what is in theory set to be coordinating entities. But if you look at the orange part, we're also looking at processes. We're also looking at what are coordination capacities of the cities in practice. So because it might very much be the case that some things are written in theory and in policies or frameworks or coalition agreements, but then in practice, they are not being implemented that way. Next slide, please. And then we come up with 5 different diagrams that we can nicely compare. It gives a very, very nice visual general overview of the different water governance systems in our 5 case study systems. But because of time reasons, I'm not going to explain you all of them. Instead, next slide, please. I would like to focus on one example where the difference becomes very nicely visible. So for example, in the lower, well, from my perspective, left corner, we have Boston. And you see that the horizontal coordination in practice reached quite very high points. While if we look at Berlin, the same category, horizontal coordination in practice, reached rather low levels. Instead, the vertical coordination, which is the one right next to it, is a little bit higher in Berlin than in Boston. So we looked into our data, how come, why is that? And one nice example, or like 2 nice examples that really show this difference here is the Office of Green Infrastructure in Boston as a great example for governments, institutions that help the implementation of NBS for CSO prevention. Because this Office of Green Infrastructure was created as a response to the fragmentation within Boston when different departments did not communicate, roads were being built, basically 2 types of drainage systems were built right next to each other because there was no communication. And then the Office of Green Infrastructure was implemented that serves as a cross-departmental coordination organ. So it solemnly helps to coordinate between the Department for Road Construction, the Department for Greenery, the Department for Schools, and then if, for example, a drain is built right next to a school building, the Office of Green Infrastructure can help here. While in Berlin, we do not have an institution like that. Instead, what we have in Berlin, for example, is the Rainwater Agency, die Regenwasseragentur. And the Rainwater Agency is an institution that is connected to the main waterworks of Berlin, and very much works on the topic of on the main theme of Berlin, which is decentralization. So the urban water management system of Berlin is all about decentralization at the moment, and the Rainwater Agency helps to collaborate between private entities, between the Senate of the city, between the industry, between different departments. So it very much makes this vertical coordination happen. And it also provides tools like knowledge tools, legal advice. Yeah. With these 2 examples, I think I will jump in right into my main session about enablers. Next slide, please. Because these 2, the Office of Green Infrastructure and the Rainwater Agency, are already nice examples of what is helping, enabling cities in terms of government's institutions. Another major enabler that we found in our interviews in the data was citizen engagement. Because in huge cities, we often have a bunch of enthusiastic citizens who want to get engaged, who want to get active, who want to shape their environment. And citizen engagement can be a very valuable tool in enhancing NBS implementation in cities. But what works even better is when it is enhanced through collective action. And one best practice example that we brought here is the Tegelwippen initiative from the Netherlands, which basically means tile flipping. So in the city of Rotterdam, this is, and on all the other cities, on most of the other cities in the Netherlands too, this is a competition between cities where citizens are invited to unseal the public floor, private and public floor. And then they can, so tegel means tile, and the idea is really which city unseals the greatest quantity of tiles, and then plants, herbs, shrubs, other sort of vegetation instead. And because it has this competitive character, it has a really, really nice potential to be scaled up. It's spread all over the country. All the cities are competing against each other now. How many tiles have already been unsealed? And from this year onwards, for example, it even came to Germany. So that's a nice example of easily scalable up measures. Next slide, please. Another enabler that has already been mentioned multiple times today and also in the keynote at the beginning of this session is cross-sector collaboration. Because this really enables an environment, an institutional environment that supports NBS implementation and the multifunctionality of NBS implementation. I've already brought the very nice examples of the Boston Office of Green Infrastructure or also the Berlin Rainwater Agency, but almost every city has a certain type of cross-sector collaboration organization, be it horizontal, be it vertical. But then what is important is that they also have the financial means and the accountability to actually do their job, basically. Next slide, please. And what also helps any sort of institution, governmental institution, but also practitioners and administrations on the ground, is if their urban water management is inspired or guided by some sort of master planning. That was often brought up, especially by practitioners in our data analysis, that if there is a lack of this master planning, policies are getting fragmented. But for example, if we have a national climate adaptation strategy that then trickles down into a local climate adaptation strategy, it really gives a nice coherent strategy and guidance to the practitioners. Visions can be set out. Where do we want to actually go? What is our main aim? Is it to become a sponge city? Is it to tackle urban heat islands? So really these kind of master planning documents can help here a lot. And the great example is the Environmental Act from the Netherlands that was just published last year in 2024. In Dutch, it's called the Omgevingswet. And it is really an overarching policy, an overarching master planning policy that is looking at water infrastructure, that is looking at biodiversity, that is looking at blue, green, all different aspects of the environment, and is then being picked up by the different cities, such as the Rotterdam Weerwoord, which is another master planning basically in Rotterdam, building upon also the Environmental Act. Next slide, please. And then staying with this example of the Environmental Act, of the Omgevingswet, what worked out really well here is that this rather, let's say, traditional tool of making a policy, making an overarching policy, was connected with an innovative approach. And in this case, it was connected with a digital tool, because this Environmental Act came together with the so-called Omgevingsloket, so the digital environmental desk, which is an online platform, a huge online platform that is basically combining all the digital information about a physical environment, a certain spot in the city. So if a company, a private person, or a city department wants to build something somewhere, they can see immediately in this digital table, this digital desk, what rules are applied there. Do we need a permit to do this? Which other entities are at play here? And these type of combination of innovative and traditional approaches really gives a big picture for citizens, for practitioners, for companies, and therefore facilitates and enables the implementation of NBS. Next slide, please. But we also, of course, found out a few barriers or things that that hamper urban water management, and when it comes especially to NBS implementation. And the first point is not a surprise. We've mentioned it multiple times now. If there is a lack of collaborative governance or a lack of a central coordination point, then very often we have missing opportunities. For example, when in urban settings infrastructure is being renovated, restored, reparations are being done, but there is no central coordination office looking at NBS, then maybe a few years later the street is being opened up again, the window of opportunity was missed because there was a lack of collaborative governance. Another point, Johannes already mentioned it earlier also, but data sharing and data management was often mentioned as something that is hampering the implementation of NBS, because different departments have different data, don't give access to the data, or the knowledge is missing on how to actually implement NBS in specific settings, or about certain regulations, how they're being applied. So that really is a huge obstacle, but also an opportunity where institutions and digital tools can easily come in to help. The insufficient master planning, I named it already, that really also showed that, like, if the absence of a citywide stormwater master plan often then results in disjointed efforts, in a fragmentation, and this fragmentation very much fails to address this interconnected challenges of combined sewer overflow mitigation and also climate resilience at the other side. Private sector engagement can be a great enabler, and therefore a low private sector engagement often has been seen as a barrier because there is a missing feeling of responsibility from the private sector. It enhances the administrative burdens. And also private sector engagement can foster citizen engagement, while on the other hand, with citizen engagement, it's also not the silver bullet. We have issues in cities such as multiple ownership. We have one house in Berlin and they want to put up a rain barrel in front of the house, but there are 10 different entities within that house. So who decides where and when and how that rain barrel is being put up? So these kind of challenges, they come up also with citizen engagement. And finally, competition over urban space has been mentioned multiple times today. I just want to add here that we're not only talking about that competition above ground, but also very much below ground. Next slide, please. And to sum up, our research very much showed that the success level of NBS implementation is very much influenced by the different government structures and policy frameworks at play in the different cities. And to look back again at that diagnostic water governance tool that we used, one thing that was apparent in all the different cities was that the coherence of responsibilities within the different administrations and institutions at play, that was the lowest score in all cities. So it seems that this is a shared barrier for all of them, but also a great opportunity for governance improvement. And almost the last point, you saw the great example of digital tools. So we strongly recommend including more of these digital tools, platforms into urban stormwater management, because it can build capacities not only for citizens, but also for policymakers and decision takers. And finally, last point, this institutional fragmentation that still occurs in many cities, and the competing priorities in administration, which is, again, this kind of lack of coherence of responsibilities, that clashes with the multifunctionality of NBS, because different administrations see different aspects of the NBS and therefore do not perceive the holistic approach of NBS implementation. Thank you very much. I think that's it from my side.
Thanks so much, Ida, and please post your questions for Ida in the Q&A while we go on to the next speakers. This is a dual presentation by David Alejandro Camacho Caballero from the University of Barcelona and Benjamin Kupilas from the Ecologic Institute, and they will be talking about, I think David is by himself, on transforming urban water management and designing transitional pathways. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the participants that have been keeping with us until now. I am the last presentation before we move to the panel. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, I think it's handy to start talking now about this process that I will be describing about transforming urban water management systems. Since as of now, we have just, we have mostly been talking about nature-based solutions, their management, governance, feasibility, and even the perceived values, which are all very valuable data. And we're trying to also see how to continue forward and how to actually transform cities for improving their conditions and the presence of nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. In order for wrapping this up, the idea of this presentation is to answer to a question: how can we better transition and guide urban water management systems toward a more desirable state? Of course, with a focus on nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. The way that we are trying to answer to these questions is by using the transition pathways methodology, which essentially is just a sequence of actions that describes how a system could evolve from its current state to a desired state. There are useful strategies or previous strategic planning tools such as roadmaps, that even though that have been useful, there may not be entirely convenient for such an endeavor, mainly, for example, in the case of roadmaps, because they don't leave room for uncertainty. They're usually very strict. Sometimes a similar case we found with scenarios that embrace higher uncertainty, but they are very passive observers and they don't play a role within the actual change in the cities. But pathways or transition pathways in our case come very handy because they are a form that allows us to both consider uncertainty, but at the same time agency that cities and stakeholders could have in how to change the state of urban spaces. And in order to apply the transition pathways, one of the main aspects to tackle or to consider is which are the opportunities, meaning those aspects that are already existing in the environment that allowed for a transition. Also, what are the innovations, meaning those resources, ideas that are not existing as of now, but could be included. And also, lastly, barriers that are essentially those aspects that are existing and limiting the change outside from the current state of the city. So in order to give this a better shape, because as of now it's a bit abstract, next slide, please. We are landing the transition pathways through the use of what is called the 3 Horizon methodology framework, which essentially is a tool that allows to plan for a systematic change over time. And the premises are pretty much straightforward. It's the 3 horizons describe 3 different moments in which the transition starts from when the transition starts to happen until when it's done. The first moment is Horizon 1, which is the current state of the urban system, in our case, of the water system. That includes, for example, the existing infrastructure, the policies and practices, and it's just the business as usual scenario. Where cities operate, based on established norms and established technologies that often offer or face limitations that need to be overcome. Then we have a desired state, which is Horizon 3, that represent a longer-term vision on what the water systems should become. And it's the desired state that addresses the current challenges happening in Horizon 1, which is the current state. And finally, we have the last state, or the in-between state, that is the transition one, which represents how to transit from a scenario 1 to a scenario 3. And this is where we find the transition pathways. It's where the experimentation, innovation, and adaptation occurs, and that allows us to move from one to another. Next slide, please. Here is a graph on how this more or less looks in a timeline manner. So I started on Horizon 1, and moving throughout time, we see that it ideally starts to diminish and fade out when Horizon 2 aspects that are, again, technologies, innovation opportunities, and overcoming of barriers start to happen. Some of these elements remain. Some of them also fade out, but essentially they allow the system to create a new paradigm and to arrive to the desired state, which is the Horizon 3. And the way that we applied these methodologies was using two case studies. Next slide, please. Mainly two case studies, the Berlin case and the Barcelona case. And the way that we operationalized this was by carrying out stakeholder workshops. Next slide, please. In Barcelona, we carried out two workshops, one in 2023 and one in late 2024. In Berlin, we carried out a workshop in late 2024 again. And what we did here, next slide, please, was essentially invite stakeholders from academia, from the public sector, practitioners, and in some cases also private companies, to ask them questions around the three horizons that we were studying. So, for example, when we ask about the current state of the city, we ask them what are the main characteristics of the stormwater management systems of the combined sewer system that are working and that are not working. What is essentially the inconveniences and the conveniences of the current water system? What should be kept and what should be changed? When we talked about the desired state, we asked them what is the future that they want for urban water systems and what should be their main characteristics. And we also asked for what are the innovations that they could be involved in order to arrive to the desired state. So we talked not only about the current state, but the desired state, but also how to transit from one to another. So we went into the socio-ecological technical solutions that could be out there, as we have seen today, that would allow us to move towards the desired future, and which could be the obstacles that we may face. And based on this application, I would like to showcase main highlights of the results that we got from this, from asking stakeholders this type of questions. Please, let's move to the next slide. Yeah, in the case of Barcelona, what we found when we were inquiring about the current state, mostly on the challenges, we faced something that we were expecting, that is that the drain infrastructure is insufficient and inflexible, and this is not the first time that we have heard about this. It has not been updated in a long time, and this leads to sediment accumulation in the pipes, and which also involves insufficient rainwater retention capacities in tanks. So it's a dual lock-in that we were having in Barcelona. And in Barcelona, the thing is that while most of the time it's not raining, when it does, usually it's pretty intense, more now with the climate change impacts. And I will talk a bit more about this, but Barcelona is also leading between two water management problems. One is the dealing with floodings, but also dealing with droughts. And this will I will talk a bit more about this when I talk about the innovations. But before that, I would like to also talk to you about another challenge that came up, which was social inequalities. So low-income neighborhoods, for example, those who know about Barcelona is El Raval, which is disproportionately exposed to climate change impacts, not exposed, but even vulnerable. These areas lack of adequate draining systems. And not only that, but due to barriers of language and lack of knowledge of municipal flooding plans, there are under low adaptive capacities, they found themselves many times vulnerable to extreme rainwater events. So this essentially, we conclude that many marginalized communities are greatly exposed to climate change and related risks. Leaving aside the challenges and talking a bit about the desired future state, Barcelona aims to enhance the community involvement in water management decisions. So to include residents, local organizations, and policymakers in order for them to collaborate, to co-design solutions, and to allow to create, a specific site solutions for the different communities, and by doing this, don't rely only on centralized drain infrastructure. Also, it has been talked about how important should be to have a circular water management, meaning to promote the water reuse and recycling at the local level. As I told you before, Barcelona often is dealing with a drought situation, and the way that the city is tackling this is by having engineered, very ambitious type of interventions, such as wastewater treatment plants and desalination plants. But the intention is to further develop local initiatives in order to promote the water reused for the water to be repurposed for household, green infrastructure, irrigation, maybe even industrial use. And the way to do this is essentially by the promotion and enhancement of nature-based solutions. And again, by decentralizing urban planning in order to mitigate flooding vulnerabilities in the more low-income areas. So essentially create water catchment at the private level to avoid the burden on central systems and allow to create more resilient communities. Next slide, please. So now we're heading to Berlin. And once again, it was remarked by stakeholders how grey infrastructure is insufficient and often is overwhelmed by the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events. As of now, and I have been reading, the Spree River is receiving around 0.6 million of cubic meters of untreated sewage, which implies a big problem from the combined overflow. And what they also talked is that there are funding challenges around the solutions for wastewater management. This I related to what Nikki was telling about the nature negative activities that are being funded often and that many of the investment go to the typical grey infrastructure initiatives. And that this is essentially one of the challenges that are experiencing now in Berlin. However, they would like to arrive into a desired state in which, similar to Barcelona, there is an enhancement of community involvement, very much related to the diversity of population, infrastructure, and vulnerabilities that exist in the city. Because, of course, there is no one solution that fits all for water management. And the idea is to have heterogenic solutions that involve not only urban planners, but also users. They talked about how there is also a need for decentralize the water management system and that there is a huge need to integrate natural systems and green infrastructure. And there are some already ongoing initiatives in Berlin, such as the Sponge City, which was discussed in the existing innovations emerging that can lead to future goals. And they talked that there is very much needed the expansion of nature-based solutions, and also the development of digital planning tools and monitoring systems, essentially to create scenarios that allow to predict how flooding, drought, and seasonality will be changing with time. We're asking about that it would be useful to have models for calculating the shifting in water management practices from economic perspective, meaning how much money could be saved if water management will be improved. Let's just finish with some final remarks. Next slide, please. About the understanding of after looking at these two case studies, well, it was clear, confirmed, and reconfirmed how unsustainable green infrastructure is, and that it won't be able. Has been mentioned and proved that it won't be able to handle climate change impacts in the long run. And because of this, we need to increase and to provide with decentralized water management system initiatives for using repurposing water during drought periods and during flooding periods. And also by doing this to allow vulnerable populations to deal with flood struggles in a more resilient way. And again, it was very much mentioned and brought up how nature-based solutions need to be a core element to harness these two challenges, because it provides a relief on the grey infrastructural central systems and also allowed for creating a decentralized approach for improved water management. Next steps around the transition pathways, we will be putting together a very detailed analysis around these workshops, and also we will be including not only the Berlin and Barcelona results, but also the Rotterdam results that we didn't have a chance to include in this presentation today, but it will be circulated among you when we have it done soon enough. And with that, I finish my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, David. I think we should cut the Q&A a little bit short because there's an external panel coming up as well. There is 2 questions for Ida. A question for you is, you mentioned competing priorities in administration clash with multifunctionality of nature-based solution. How would you like to see overcoming this barrier?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I can answer that quite quickly. Thinking, for example, about these intersectional collaboration institutions that, for example, in Berlin and Boston are at place. So I think if you have the Department for Economic Growth who wants to build a new business park, but then you have the Department for Green Spaces or for Health that wants to create instead at the same place an urban park, having a coordination entity that can facilitate dialogue between them, I think that would very much help. And another idea would also be greater stakeholder engagement here, because if you have 2 competing plans for the same space due to the different priorities of administrations, you can also ask the citizens what they would prefer. If you give them input information and give them time to consider, I think that is a great chance also for citizen engagement and involvement.
Yeah, that links actually to the second question that is posed to you by Max Lopez Machel, where he sees this as a binary thing, right? Do the citizens push the government for changes in the related politics, or is the government that should push the citizens to such transformation?
Yeah, I think it needs both.
Yeah,
so if you have a lot of top-down initiatives, and then in the end they're not being respected also by the citizens, we had the topic of vandalism at the beginning, then it really it's not sustainable. But on the other hand, if you have a lot of bottom-up engagement, we have heard that in the Boston case, if I remember correctly, that there is a lot of citizen initiatives and neighborhood groups, but they have no say in the policy. Like all of their ideas, there are 1 million workshops and they're never being picked up by the policymakers, and then this energy is completely vanishing, which is also a waste of resources in a way. So I think it really needs both.
Yeah, perhaps I can give a shout out to this really massive a national citizens science campaign we're running in where people adopt the sewage overflow and measure during 1 year. What we see actually that increasing the environmental literacy of people makes them more educated citizens. So it's about good citizenship. So they are more aware of the rules and regulations, because I think we all are perhaps to some extent a bit naive. Often the rules and regulations are quite strict, at least in the Netherlands, but I feel in the entire EU, the enforcement is often a problem. And then by having citizens pick up the role of enforcers is a very powerful tool, I feel. We see different conversations between citizens and municipalities going on now. Now they are aware that they have a right to clean water. I don't see any questions anymore, but I think for the Q&A, I think most of the speakers will be more than happy to answer them through the chat. I think we may want to have a 3-minute break for people to to go to the restrooms and so on. And let's make it even. And with apologies for being late, let's return back to the final panel discussion at 15:20. So 15 minutes later, I feel then, 5 minutes later than in the schedule. And thanks for your enthusiasm so far. The final point on our agenda this exciting meeting is the panel discussion, and where we have 4 important people discussing around a couple of interesting statements. The first panel member is David Maddox. He's the founder and executive director of the Nature of Cities, a global platform, and discussions are promoting interdisciplinary dialogue on urban nature and sustainability. Then we have Chantal van Ham, who is a senior expert on biodiversity and nature-based solutions and the development of nature-positive strategies. She's the Landscape Partnership Development Lead for Europe at Commonland. And she worked previously. She worked at the ISVN European Regional Office as the EU Program Manager for the integration of nature-based solutions into urban development. Then we have Rebecca Noble, who is working at the Senate Department for Mobility, Transport, Climate Protection and Environment at the City of Berlin, where she coordinates the update and implementation of the Berlin Strategy for Biological Diversity. And finally, we have our own Tom Walt, who is a landscape ecologist with a strong interest in urban biodiversity. He is a lecturer in the School of Architecture and Landscape at the University of Sheffield, and he has extensive expertise in urban water management and green infrastructure. And that are all people ready for giving their pitches? Yeah. Then I think next slide. I've introduced everybody. So this is the question by, I think, Chantal van Ham, right? What role does public? Well, you can say it yourself as well if you want to.
Thanks so much for this introduction. Yes, indeed. So the question that I would like to address in my pitch is what role does public perception play in the mainstreaming and upscaling of nature-based solutions, and how can science help bridge the gap between awareness and action? So for my story, I would like to zoom in. There is a slide, I think, on the catastrophic floods that happened in Valencia in October last year. And this information is actually from a story, and you see the link at the bottom of the slide, called A Tale of Two Cities by Mongabe, and it also includes Porto Alegre in Brazil. But yeah, what this is about is really zooming out on the city in that broader landscape, and in particular, the role that landscape degradation has in all of these developments that we see currently in the world. Because I think that scientists obviously have linked this disaster to carbon emissions and intensifying climate change. As we all know, also according to the International Panel on Climate Change, these extreme weather events are increasingly causing different problems, including floods and drought, due to human-driven impacts. But actually, there is of course, also other aspects related to this. One is the destabilization of the world's water cycle, which is also, not only leading to heavy rainfall in a short period of time, as what happened in Valencia, where there was an extreme high level of rainfall in 24 hours, but also little precipitation in many regions. And some of the parts of Spain are also, of course, very much suffering from this. But the other part is also related to something else, which is that there is in the rural areas near Valencia, for many years, deforestation, soil compaction due to agricultural land use, and this has reduced the ability of the landscape to absorb rainwater in a natural way. And this has also led to this rapid runoff that intensifies downstream flooding. So what is interesting about this story is that this has actually been identified many years ago by a scientist, little known climatologist, Mr. Milan, who is from the region of Valencia. And when he was young with his father, hunting for partridges in the mountain areas, they started to realize the changes in the cloud formations and the climate patterns. And he started to also investigate this as part of his climate research work. So in addition to the atmospheric effects, also the effects of deforestation, of land use change. So this is actually something that has not been really taken into account in many cases in our responses and in our actions to such climate disasters. So I think what is interesting here is when we think about the role that science can have, but also in our perception and awareness of what we can do about these developments. That's what we also do in Common Land, is that nature degradation and climate change are very much linked. It's not too late to do something, because we see that integrating these restoration actions and improving the ecological functions of soils, of other landscapes, can lead to positive effects, not only for this absorption of water capacity, but also for biodiversity and for agriculture and stabilizing the climate. So this restoration can help to reduce these effects, but also give a chance of reconnection for people with the landscape, because living in a city, you often don't realize that this wider environment is very much determining what we on a day-to-day basis experience in our life. So there is a lot of regenerative norms, as we say, in this. And unfortunately, Mr. Milan passed away about 8 months before the floods in Valencia. But some people have summarized some of the key to his work. And what I found really interesting is that, one thing he said is that humans consist of 60% of water, birds roughly 75%, fish even more, but trees 80 to 90%. So if you have a natural functioning system, in particular, trees and forests, then this landscape can also absorb this water, but also keep it for times of drought, but also use it in moderating the climatic effects and increase climate cooling. So in this respect, I think it's really interesting to think about nature-based solutions in that urban context in a much broader view on this whole, let's say, bioregion, where you can improve many things by looking at the system of land and climate, water and life overall. So this also has, of course, many benefits for the lives of people, but also eventually for reducing cost of these disasters. So that's I think in a nutshell the story I wanted to. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I also like to remind people that they can also participate in the discussion by posting in the chat. Next, I would like to invite Tom Wild to give his pitch.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's one slide for me. I was asked to kind of respond to the question around what governance strategies and policy tools are essential for mainstreaming nature-based solutions for urban water management into urban planning management frameworks. So next slide, please. I think So firstly, I'd say it's important for us to reflect back on the first talks from today, and particularly the introduction of the SETS concept, the social, ecological, technical systems concept. In other words, the interfaces between the social, technical, ecological criteria that are relevant to our governance and policy impacts. As explored in our article for Berlin here, sitting in our own soup was a quote direct from one of our interviewees about water quality impacts linked with climate change and other drivers. Our work in NICHES across the 5 cities has shown that the technical considerations around combined sewers have in the past been well catered for in terms of the key institutions, the impact assessment frameworks and the kind of indicators, the KPIs, key performance indicators. But using the SETS mapping, we can see in the 5 NICHES cities of Barcelona, Berlin, Boston, Rotterdam and Sheffield, that generally the social ecological nexus has not been well covered. Biodiversity issues have been less well addressed, as have themes like aesthetics and access to water. And in fact, even water quality in receiving water bodies is not always well understood, which is critical, bearing in mind that, as we probably all know, water quality in receiving rivers is not the same thing as the pollution loads in the CSO discharges themselves. So, the impacts that these things have depend on obviously the flow conditions and so on. And sometimes you're dealing with systems where there is virtually no flow in dry weather. The mapping also shows that we've done, looking at this kind of set framework, that shows that some of the themes such as resources, including water resources, but other resources like in terms of construction and so on, and heat have been peripheral in some cities, including my own, but may become emerging priorities based on the experiences of these other places. So we can learn from each other, and I think this is one of the benefits of a project like this. And I'll not keep you really much longer because you've been patient sticking to the end of the day, but what this says to me overall is that the values are shifting, and that combined sewers and urban water management can no longer be seen as just a techno-economic consideration. With climate change and fluctuating river water levels and new forms of citizen engagement and civic action, we need different sets of assessment frameworks and indicators. So I think that's everything for me. It's been a delight to come today, and thank you very much to the hosts.
Thanks so much, Tom. And next we will have David Maddox of Nature of Cities delivering his pitch.
I'm David from the Nature of Cities. It's great to see Chantal here. Chantal is a board member of Nature of Cities, so it's great to see you there. In my slide, I want to talk about the idea of human perception and how we connect to it. Is the idea of human perception, the regular people, how they perceive nature-based solutions and the sustainability questions that we try to address in our work are important? Absolutely, they have to be, they must be. It would be immoral if they were not the case. And can science help? Yes, but only by being somehow more legible and more relevant to human experience. So I'd like to say 3 quick things about this question, this idea. And number 1 is, what do we mean by mainstreaming? In particular, who are we trying to mainstream these ideas with? And if the case is of trying to reach people who are not like the people on this call, I think the professionals, this expert class of people, then we need to talk about the questions, the work that the relevance of our work. We need to talk about it differently. And one of the things I know probably many people on this call are very used to the Horizon European Commission framework. And I think one of the things that we all need to do is disseminate less and engage more. I know that that's the word of the European Commission is to disseminate information, but I really dislike intensely the word dissemination because it's all one way. What we need to actually do is have a 2-way communication with people. So we are engaging with them. And then the third thing is that if we want to engage people, that it's key that we have to meet people where they are. And not where we want them to be, not where we wish they were, not where we think that if they only were paying attention to us, they would be, because they're paying attention to many things in their lives: prosperity, safety, the kind of daily concerns that they have, and we need to reach them in those ways. And one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that there are many ways to do that, none of them involve necessarily more reports about the kinds of work we're doing, but actually need to involve engaging with people on human scale and emotion-laden ways. Now, there's many ways to do it. In listening to the previous speakers, I heard a lot of them. So many of us are doing this work, and I think we really need to lean into this work, and also lean into the funding agencies to ask us to do more work like this, where we can connect with people on human scales on the ground, and make real legible connections between the kind of important work that everybody on this call is doing to the people's lived experiences. Here's a bunch of the kinds of examples of work that are being done. Nature of Cities is involved in a lot of these, from comics to workshops that connect people, to connect art and lived experience to conservation and sustainability issues. One thing I want to say briefly, right before we came here, someone said something about the many different the community scale efforts get lost because they're not coordinated. And I think maybe that's a challenge to the rest of us to figure out how we can coordinate those different human scale elements. There's some dear friends at the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. federal agency, very troubled these days, obviously. And one of the things that they've been doing is trying to gather together different community organizations in something called the stewardship networks, STUMAP, they call it. And when we bring those organizations together, they can have more political power. They can coordinate their messages. They can share resources. And they can start to seem like the political power that they actually are. Not one tiny organization, neighborhood organization at a time, but gathered together. And then they can have some political clout. Then we can talk to them. They can talk to us in coordinated ways. So one of the questions that I was setting out to answer is, which of the methods are most useful which community scale approaches should we be pursuing to mainstream ideas and sustainability? And the answer to me is all of them, because every different community would be reachable where they are through different methods. And we build a vocabulary that we can share values with, because all of our work has to be value-based. What do we believe in? What do the people believe in? And how can we connect our work to their lived experience through shared vocabularies of values? Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for this inspiring pitch. Next, we will have Rebecca. Rebecca is, as said before, she's working at the Senate Department for Mobility, Transport, Climate Protection and Environment at the City of Berlin. Please be welcome to give your pitch.
You're still muted, Rebecca.
Yeah, I know. Thank you very much for having me, and also the kind introduction. I also chose the question B to give a short brief on, but I just also thought to give some bridging the two questions you showcased. So maybe you give my slide, and I just brought with me 3 examples from my city, Berlin. So I think from what I've seen, I think you already know my first example quite well. It's also kind of the very fitting example for the NICHES project. So this is the Berlin Rainwater Agency. And I want to give these examples to just showcase what like cooperation matters in also implementing nature-based solutions. And I think this is something very well also sitting with the pitch David gave just now. I think just to have different kinds of cooperations within cities is it's very valuable and is so much needed. So this Rainwater Agency in Berlin is from the city of Berlin with the water works in Berlin, and they just focus on the decentral water management systems, and also like having the focus on supporting the sponge city concept. So yeah, and I think the mandate so far is until the end of this year, but let's see, maybe it continues work. The second example is something like kind of differently based. It's the neighborhood management in Berlin, which is also institutionalized, but like on the just on the communal level. And I think it's also kind of fitting here because it has like a very broad context. It's like focused also on the disadvantaged neighborhoods where like all the people that living there are addressed to also get active and find a common place to get involved and for instance improve their surroundings in the neighborhoods with gardening options and also the small unsealing projects, for example. So I think there's depending also on the locations and on the neighborhood, there are quite active initiatives which are very inspiring. So I think this is something that is can be very forceful in the way also to get people involved and have this kind of bottom-up initiatives, which is also very useful, as also Ida already said some minutes ago. And the third example I just chose here is the allotment gardens in Germany, which is kind of a big thing as a German tradition. And as it's like on, like I think 2/3 of the gardens are on public land. So only in Berlin, it's kind of, I think, 3,000 hectares, and which makes up 3% of the total area of Berlin, which is kind of a huge area to target. And I think this is kind of special also for a city to have such huge, largely green area to also be able to have a connection to. And we have this kind of Berlin State Association of Gardening Friends, where all the gardening enthusiasts from this allotment gardens come together, and they also are in contact with our administration, for example, and that we also there foster not the kind of very traditional gardening style in Germany, but also to get some new ideas and also some diversity and some also water management options also to these kind of areas, which is kind of, I think, also can be very effective because you also reach out to people that are not in this kind of bubble, but still like nature interested and have their own space, green space. So yes, I think with these I give back to the floor, and yes, happy to get involved in.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I would like to give the other panelist or the panelists to give the opportunity to add or comment on the pitches they heard by other people. So, the floor is yours. Is there things popping up in your head that sort of urge saying in this this virtual space?
I have one. This is David. One of the things I think we are always challenged with is we try to connect scientific and government initiatives to people on the ground, and the many different things that are happening on the ground, particularly community-based organizations like Friends of Park groups or community garden groups, is how to somehow to gather them together. They tend to fracture. They tend to remain. The community groups tend to remain isolated. The science and government groups tend to communicate through broad communications. Is there a way that we can somehow gather organizations together? I mentioned this idea of STUMAP that the U.S. Forest Service has been working on as a network of organizations. But I'm curious about other ways that other experiences people have to try to gather these disparate organizations, these disparate conversations into joined conversations so they can have more power. That to me is implied in a lot of the individual work that Rebecca talked about, that Chantal talked about, and that Tom talked about too.
Yeah, maybe David, I can add something to that. Yeah, from the work that we do in Common Land, which is of course not an organization that works in an urban type of setting, but rather at a landscape level. What does that mean? For example, in the south of Spain, there's a landscape that's over 100,000 hectares that has, of course, many different land users and landowners and stakeholders. And the approach that we use is very much a landscape vision for a period of 20 years, because that's what we believe it takes in order to restore the natural functions of such a system. And yeah, within that process, it's very much about, yeah, first of all, gaining an understanding of each other's view on this, but also in starting with a group within that whole wide landscape that says, yes, I'm willing to make a change. So if you think about, yeah, this landscape in Spain, it's many farmers, for example, more than 200 farmers are involved, in addition to municipalities and scientific organizations and businesses. But these farmers, some of them say, yes, I want to work with regenerative approaches. There are many in that entire area that don't, but once they start to see the effect that it has in terms of the production or the health of that landscape, it starts to, yeah, trigger an interest, so that others may also start to join. So yeah, I think, yeah, what is quite essential to that approach is that you really develop that vision, that plan for that landscape together with all these actors and for a very long time period. So that's a little bit how we approach that.
Yeah, that's also an element of future forward thinking, right? That you think in horizons of 25 years or so, and to also not make it your backyard problem. And I think it's very intuitive and helpful, I would say. Rebecca, or yeah, Tom, you want to comment on something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have an interesting experience in South Yorkshire, which is in Northern England, with the development of a new local nature recovery strategy, which is it's been quite interesting, like a lot of consultation engagement, direct participation in shopping centres and the places where people are and things. The reality is that's where many people are. And alongside that, an interesting initiative to treat the River Don, our major river system, as a living entity, as a kind of natural person, you know, this kind of movement towards recognition of nature as with the same rights. And the one thing that strikes me is, in response to David's kind of provocation in a way, is that I find those social media and web-based engagements interesting but insufficient, and somehow connecting together these stewards and these participants and the people that are active on the ground requires something much more than just the web presence. And I really miss the old kind of forums where people would get together, 100+ people, the local environmental activists and so on. For instance, the kinds of groups that were really behind the formation of ICLEI in the early days. And I think that partly reflects where we are. I guess we have to accept the reduced resources and so on. But those meetings where people come together personally are so powerful, and they do something very different to the web-based engagement. I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's my take. Thanks.
Rebecca, you have your hand raised as well. Do you want to reflect on Tom or on David or Chantal?
Yeah, I just had some thought on also what David said, because I think this is a indeed critical problem. This is why I also thought this example on this allotment gardens is quite nice, because they have this kind of overarching roof organization where they are also very active, and I think these are kind of can be very active people and an interesting partner also then for the government also to work with and develop strategies and interesting concept, and also then go back to the users directly. So I think you have the way to the implementation. And what I also wanted to maybe just give thought to in Berlin, we also have for some concepts or some topics, the like cooperation points, which we as a city provide, for instance, for the topic of environmental education, for instance, where we have all, like we involve all the dispersed initiatives and all the different actors in the city, and we have this per district as well, and so that we have this district focal point, and then we have also a city focal point where they then meet up. So we have a cascade of then also having this kind of bringing them together, exchanging information to see what we have on the ground, because sometimes you don't even, for instance, as a city, you don't even know what exists already, and then you have, like, especially in Berlin, where you have so many different levels of hierarchies, you don't even like see what's already going on, and you do something that's not even the right purpose to do. So I think this in some for some topics we have this, but it could be more, and I think this showed to be quite successful also in the working together and also exchange and to get this kind of overview.
David, would you like to respond for that?
I just it's bravo to all of this conversation, really, because it's, you imagine what's going to need to happen to make the restoration law in Europe work. It's going to require an immense amount of coordination across disciplines, across geographies, across people who maybe didn't ordinarily work together, because these ecosystems that are meant to be restored and strengthened for the benefit of both nature and for people are gonna have to spend civil society organizations and human communities on the ground that didn't necessarily think that they had something to work together for before. Almost any of them. So, you know, the towns across 10, 20, 30, 40 kilometers away. And people who outside even those boundaries are going to have opinions about what's happening in those other areas as well. So that this it's an exciting thing. This the European Restoration Law, and unbelievably daunting in terms of the kind of sensitive and patient and loving kind of coordination we're going to have for each other to make it work.
Yeah, perhaps a personal reflection on this. For the past 2 years, we had a platform that you are describing in the Netherlands, specifically not for urban areas, but for rural areas. At the same time, you have all over Europe, you have a counter force by the political climate to not to cancel these type of platforms. So I want to be hopeful in that these platforms can be established, but you also see that they're tied to political cycles, because that's where the money is coming from. Yeah.
And we're going to have to talk to people who don't agree with us, and that's why it has to be a conversation somehow about finding a shared vocabulary around values. And it can't be just us raising our flag and say, this is the way it has to be. This is the way it needs to be. So we have to find things that lean in to what our shared benefits are, and those things can be emotion laden. We need to try to acknowledge that there are political differences, some very deeply held, and maybe they seem intractable, but so we have to find a different way. It can't just be beating our heads against the same old wall all the time. And that to me, that's going to have to be about trying to get out of the clouds in terms of the big kind of conversations we often have around environmentalism, and talk about human scale, emotion laden kind of questions. It's one of the problems we have with climate change in general, talking about it, right? Because climate change always seems like something that's happening somewhere else. and it's always something that's going to be taken away from me. And so, but let's talk about something that might happen locally and find a shared benefit that we might some benefit we might be able to share and start there. That's going to happen at local levels.
Do the other people want to reflect on this? And do they see maybe an actionable pathway to start doing this, perhaps?
Yeah, I think indeed that, David, you referred already to it, that there is this participative process in itself that is already something which, yeah, hopefully brings people together from these different disciplines across geographic zones and across sectors. Again, back to that landscape plan, when we think about landscape restoration, what Common Land follows is something called TRU, that was created by MIT, Otto Scharmer, and it's very much about understanding each other's perspectives and working from what we call spaces of belonging. So on the one hand, that is, where are we from? Where are our roots? And cutting across those different aspects of a landscape, but it's also the same for a city. It's we look for the benefits for nature, for people, for livelihoods, but actually in this model we also consider the social cohesion and the inspiration, because that is what connects us to the places where we're from, but also to each other, and that you, through that process where you go through this TRU, try to bridge that divide and heal that link between these different areas, between people among themselves, but also the community as a whole. And of course that comes with a lot of conflicting interests. As you said, in the Netherlands, we see that very strongly, and that's also where my colleagues are very much engaged in creating, those types of spaces where people can talk and come together, even if they have a very different perspective, because they all see that there is, of course, a need to change something. So that's a little bit how we try to approach it, and we think that this momentum of developing such a legislation will also create more and more of such spaces to discuss. And I think understanding the value that was also mentioned before by some of you, also maybe in financial terms, what is the value investing in nature-based solutions, can help also to convince maybe those that currently think it is only a cost. But for example, if you can benefit from nature-based solutions and reduce these costs of climate effects, or you can improve your production and your crops in a positive way and reduce the use of pesticides or other things that cost money, then maybe it can also start to find some common ground.
You see a lot of nodding. Is there any other things people would like to comment on? We covered already to a large extent the question I was supposed to ask about what the best approaches are for incorporating community perspective, commitment, and cultural values. I think Chantal also posted a Common Lands vision plan, restoration vision and plan for inspiration. Is there any comments or additions from the panel? Otherwise, I continue to the Q&A, where people have been asking questions as well, and I should,
I'd add a commendation for things like the Berlin Nature Pact, the Berlin Biodiversity Pact that Berlin's been working on. Rebecca, I guess you've been working on it. Sandra, people like that especially when they can start to connect with people at small scales about why biodiversity would be meaningful to them. It's really important.
I first thought to put it on the slide, but then it was too much, so I against it. But I think the Berlin Nature Text it's just starting. That's really exciting. So we will see how it works, and we can also really get into this kind of how we close to implementation basically. And I think it's already have some cities that are involved and they signed the pact, and it's getting more. So I think we will see. But I think it's a very important initiative for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What I also wanted to mention, just briefly, now I forgot it because you mentioned the pact. Maybe it comes back.
I'll add something quickly from COP in October in Cali. There was the blue zone where all the experts were, and then there was the green zone where all the people were, and that was right downtown. And they had 1 million people wandering through the green zone in Cali. People really, they want to engage this way, but they need a way to do it. And they need a mechanism to do it. They need a context for conversation at their scale. And I thought it was really exciting that green zone in Cali was so successful. I hope it can be recreated in other COPs and other kinds of conversations as well. Cali's going to have a week of biodiversity in October that they want to continue this conversation that engages regular people wandering around the streets with these conservation issues at scales that make sense to both the experts and to the people. Really exciting.
And now I have it again. I just wanted to also give one example, because some weeks ago we also were approached by a fellow colleague from another ministry who is in charge of the sporting areas, which are also huge in Berlin. And she's an enthusiast and said it's not in my job description, but I do want to change something about this huge sport areas that are very not in a way that they should look like as a green element of the city. And so I think this was one woman very engaged and said let's have some cooperation. And this is on the more on the governance level still, but this is also something that can go to the ground and as you say, cross departmental cooperation, which just can happen when people have this kind of relationship, or just are open to new ideas also, and have this kind of exchanges, which can be also informal, and then also to have this kind of access to for instance, the sport groups that are many, that are young people, that are very mixed, that are not in this kind of already green projects only, but I think you have there some context, and you see also you can talk about the values and benefits also for this kind of different type of green also in this kind of sport area, to have this as a combination for your recreation and the social rooms you generate. And I think this is also something where I, from the city perspective, also think there are still there's so much potential still, which is not completely used. And this made me kind of happy actually to see, okay, we have new ways we can still go and be effective also in communicating, maybe also to even go as far on the ground as possible. So let's see how this, for instance, works out. But I think this is also something to account for.
So perhaps linking to this is a question for you, Rebecca, from the audience. And that is what the implications of the nature, David already talked a bit about it, restoration law has for the implementation of nature-based solutions in Berlin. Perhaps you could reflect on that.
I think it's kind of hard to say on this stage, because we are still also in Germany in this phase where we are on this theoretical level, how to include all the numbers and measures into this format. And what not only the EU but also the national level wants from the states in Germany, which is kind of complicated. So I think this is still in this kind of strategic phase, but what we have is already some cross-departmental communication and discussion, which what I really thought made so much sense what you said is, David, that it's kind of a huge potential to also go different ways and to have new channels of communication also with the agricultural ministries, where we also saw that there are people very interested in our work and in our topics, and they want to happily it makes sense to just talk with the people and see that many of them, they are more interested in as we maybe initially thought. So and I think then we realized, oh, there are so much more topics we should cover jointly, and these are the moments maybe that matter and lead to more cooperation in the future.
Tom.
Yeah, I was thinking about David's point around meeting people where they are, and maybe just wanted to end on a maybe quite happy, interesting story from this weekend. So we had very heavy rainfall here in Sheffield on Saturday, extremely heavy rainfall. And I was out at a site on Sunday morning where some amenity grassland that is on top of previously brownfield land, a derelict school that was knocked down. It was left vacant and derelict for many years, and eventually crushed down and turned into amenity grassland. And working with others, we implemented some sustainable drainage systems, some, small wetlands, areas of biodiversity net gain for amphibians and so on. And as I was walking around, I was kind of thinking about the process and the progress. And I turned around a corner and saw a pheasant, Fascianus colchicus, for the pedants around you about the different pheasants. And it really caught my attention, because people maybe have seen the swales, the water, the suds, the things, but they won't have seen the worms in the soil that have arrived because of, not using pesticides and herbicides. They won't have noticed these details about the invertebrates because they're probably too small to see. But if you see a pheasant, you really can't ignore it. And if you're walking a dog, your dog's going to have a hell of a great time chasing a pheasant around. So, these things, sometimes it just takes time, takes a little bit of a time. And then, engaging with people directly at the local level, that for me, that's the most exciting, the conversations that really make a difference. And, it's sad that we can only take part in these kind of conferences, but I wish we could somehow get out to each other's sites a little bit more and just enjoy these benefits, the very real, palpable sensations that we have like that. I think that would be my plea moving forward. So let's do more celebration like that, please. Thank you.
You're here. Yeah.
That's a really happy message. I'm thinking the audience is a bit quiet. Is there questions to the panel members? Now is your chance to talk to these experts. We have Ida having her hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I'd just ask it by voice. That's sometimes nicer. We were touching a little bit on the topic of emotions, like the sense of belonging or memory of space. And I think that is a super important element also in nature-based solutions in urban water management, because emotions can be a super powerful tool to get people's acceptance, to implement things when we think about landscapes that they really love. So I think that can be a nice card to play when we want people's acceptance. But on the other hand, we also have emotions of, for example, I'm taking stereotypes here because I'm German, car owners, car people love their car, less parking spots, less garage, and so on. There is anger, there is, emotions. So how can we also respectfully acknowledge negative emotions that might come up with NBS or with these movements? And is there a wise way to play that card, basically?
Nice question, Ida. Someone is courageous, David, to pick this up.
Sure. I think we have to acknowledge them and again, to me, meet them where they are. We can't simply bully them with our point of view, and find something that is shared there. Maybe some conversations will be too far to bridge, but maybe we can bridge some little ones along the way and get closer. We think about it, and I live in New York, and we're struggling with one right now about congestion pricing that we just implemented, and it creates a lot of difficult conversations between people who live in the city and want a more livable New York City, and people who are commuting in from the outside. It's still a conversation we have to have, And we can't necessarily, we can't always arrive at these conversations presuming that we're in the right. There's a great friend in architect P.K. Das does in Mumbai, does a whole lot of participatory work designing the cleanup of the rivers that go through Mumbai. And I asked him before, PK, so how do you do it? What's the most difficult thing for you in these kind of collaborative participatory processes? And he said, I'm the expert. I'm the architect, and so in the sense I know what the right answer is, or maybe people presume I do, and so we know that there's no buzzkill like a plan. So the architect comes in and drops a plan on the table, and then the people say, okay, well what's left to talk about now? Nothing. And so he said that the biggest thing I've had to learn is how to check my profession at the door and arrive at this conversation as a participant rather than an expert. Now, there'll be times when then he needs to be called in as an expert, as we all might, and there's times that we need to say, I'm in this as part of a conversation, and recognizing some of that where we can enter the conversation as a regular citizen and not as an expert, I think is going to be really important. It takes the temperature down for maybe everybody, not all the time, and there's things that maybe seem intractable, but I think we need to arrive at these things with a lot of humility. That's my impression.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think there's some really great work on co-design and co-creation written about this and how to go about this and the power of listening as well. I think, and a lot of people listen today. But I agree, and I think I think as scientists we often take the moral high ground, but that's based on our assumptions, right? And there's a lot to doing a lot of participatory science. There's a lot to learn about from citizens, I would say. These are all professionals in their own right. Chantal, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, maybe a last thing on that. Yeah, that's I think a little bit to do with the fact that we have a system in this world that is based on very rational thinking, very often linked to an economic dimension, and that in many times dominates our debates, our discussions, our ways of looking at things, whereas at the same time we're all humans. So we just mentioned, let's play that card of the emotion, but I think it's really something in us that we don't always give the space, and that's very much that aspect that we're connected to each other and we're connected to life in all the forms that it has. And yeah, of course, that's not something obvious to do, because you're often trapped in that system, so to say. But if you can start to think of such processes, participative process of giving space to that dimension as well, and we do that a lot, in particular also, yeah, many young people have this feeling of eco-anxiety, don't see a way through, and yeah, when you work in the field that we do, it's sometimes really going against the stream. So yeah, somehow finding that bridge to what is in every person, that there is this other, let's say, paradigm, the less rational, the more connecting. And that actually starts by just saying that if I help one other person, I've already changed the world. And if everyone would do that, then we can really change everything. So that is, yeah, something that I sometimes try to think of in such conversations, and also how to start them.
Yeah, and I encourage people to read about the philosophy of hope. Sometimes our conversations are dominated by the philosophy of doom, and it's very easy if you have a triple planetary crisis. Interesting work now being written on the philosophy of hope as well, and I think we need hope in this time, right? We're looking, I think, about. I'm hearing a very quiet audience. I don't know if they are just Zoom fatigued or screen fatigued, maybe to some extent. I don't know if the panelists still want to reflect on something, or if we are ready to hand it over to Ulf for some final words.
I would say one more thing about the idea of transdisciplinarity and collaboration. The transdisciplinarity, collaborating with other people is hard. Especially if that collaboration is beyond your own training, your own experience. And one of the things that has to happen, but we give we give very little time to is the idea of we often talk about transdisciplinarity and collaboration requires trust. Trust only comes from time together. We can't gather people together who have different trainings, different outlooks, different points of view, even ones that might seem like they go together well, and instantly dive into, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to work together? How are we going to collaborate? It's too fast. That there's a sense in which we need to find ways in which we can linger with each other a little longer, so we get to through lingering, we might start to develop some shared vocabulary, and we might be able to develop some trust that then allows us to talk about some of the things that we might do together and that we might disagree with, little by little. So it addresses to me some of Ida's question about how do you bridge people differences across people who are very different. Well, start small, start a little bit by lingering together, and so you can have the time to find the things that you might actually share, like, oh, we both like that park over there, as opposed to arguing about parking.
Indeed. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Ulf, who will wrap up this day, which has been exciting to me, and I hope to others as well. And I want to thank the panelists, David Maddox, Rebecca Noble, Tom Wild, and Chantil van Hoom, for being such active panel members. And over to you, Ulf.
Thank you, Lisette.
Thank you very much. Can you see my slides?
Yes, not in the presenter mode yet.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Okay, that doesn't seem to work. Okay. Let's do it this way. I hope you can see it. Yeah.
Yes.
So I would like to take the chance to give you some final remarks, and actually wrote down those things that were most interesting for me, and maybe it also resonates with you. So I think we learned that nature-based solutions can, to some extent, effectively address stormwater, water quality, and biodiversity challenges. We've seen the limitations. We discussed urban runoff and other topics, so this is to keep in mind. We also discussed that there is no one-fits-all solution. We need to make sure that the gray meets the green, and we always have to adjust these nature-based solutions to the local settings. When communicating about nature-based solutions, maybe one vehicle that could help us is to make mental and health aspects more visible in order to advertise nature-based solution implementation. The discussion that I found super interesting was the whole topic about we only have a few natural spots left in city escapes, and we really need to make sure that the degradation of those spots is somehow stopped. And this protection also is very cost effective. So we should always keep that in mind, that not all parts of the city need to be freely accessible. We also discussed that climate change considerations are super important when we design nature-based solutions. Just think of tree types that can selected by landscape architects or others. But we also have to make sure that there are always habitats for those species who can't be resilient because of their very nature. We also discussed the topic about space availability, and there are more spaces in cities where things can be implemented. Very often we think about public ground where nature-based solutions should fit, but no, I think it's much wider. The cityscape is much wider. Just if you think about harbors, river areas, former industrial areas, you mentioned cemeteries, allotment gardening. So be more creative in finding those spots in the cities where measures can be implemented. Then I move on with my second slide. Successful NBS implementation requires stakeholder design, ensuring local relevance and community acceptance. But we also discussed that coordination is pretty much needed. Very often those actor groups are super dispersed and hard to access. In order to make their voice heard, coordination is very much needed. We discussed a lot the topic of mainstreaming, and very often mainstreaming is mentioned in respect of changing institutions and how they perform, but it is also important to have mainstreaming of nature-based solutions in mind when we are experimenting with planning processes, for instance, or stakeholder engagement. We discussed the topic of outreach and communication very, very often. Just what stayed in my memory was that it's very important that there are some topics. I mentioned before the health topic, but you could also think of the heat or the flood topic. If I think about the research results from Barcelona or the audience-specific outcomes, like for instance, that we have to take into consideration different income groups. So targeted outreach is crucial, but be sensitive to your target audience. Meet the people where they are, David, disseminate less, engage more. Yeah, and really when we interact with people who have a different opinion, it's very important to emphasize common interests and the shared benefits. We need to be spatially explicit, and to do so, we need data. We need more data in order to analyze and identify preferences. We've seen the SETS approach could work to identify vulnerabilities and to perform risk assessments. So yeah, this data integration, this evidence-based planning needs to be improved. We also discussed effective governance, but what that actually means that we need clear policies, we need long-term just planning. There was this buzzword, future forward thinking. This is very essential when we want to make sure that our nature-based solutions are impactful. Yeah, so we discussed what positive aspects it could bring if we have integrated models and digital decision support tools. Maybe one last thing that I really want to highlight is that there are some recent developments also in the policy area, like the nature restoration regulation. And although we yet not fully understand what opportunities go along with it, I think we should use this opportunity in order to overcome governance, but also space competition issues. So these were my personal closing remarks and the reflection on the conference. We will move on now. This is the interesting question now, what comes next? I mean, we already said that the NICHES project somehow now comes to an end, but that doesn't mean that we stop writing up things. In fact, we still, or some of the partners still have 2 or 3 months to go. You can find all our outputs on this website, and just be sure we will still write up our results and publish them. This is very important, and you can find everything that we have compiled here on our website. What also will happen after the workshop is that we have produced this video, which will be put online, so you can still reflect on it. I think it is important to say that, for instance, also when we put the presentations online, please share the word. Everything you learned here today, I think most of you guys are multipliers, and you should really use this function. Now comes the last slide, and this is about saying thank you. There are so many involved to make this a very successful conference that I can hardly remember them all. So I just will mention some of those people. So thank you very much, Ida Meinberg, who was responsible for the concept of this whole international conference and did a very great job in bringing all those presenters and groups and actors together. Thank you very much also for everyone who had thematic input into the conference. Thank you very much to all my colleagues from the NICHES project. We will stay in touch afterwards, and we will make sure that we compile nice results from this conference. But also, I was really very pleased to see that there are so many external actors who really were eager to contribute to here. Thank you very much. That was really a big enrichment of our final conference, and enjoyed it very much. Also, big thank you for the facilitators of this workshops, which are Pensoft. Maria and Gabriella did a great job, and you see this very nice and fancy design that really helped us to make the whole international conference appealing. So with that, I don't know how about you, but I feel a bit exhausted. It was a very long day, and I know it needs some discipline to sit so many hours here in front of the screen. Now, I just wish you all a very nice rest of the day, and I also wish you that you have now some time to enjoy some nature-based solutions in your surroundings. With that, I close this event and hope we see each other again very soon. Goodbye. Ciao.